Welcome to Let's Talk Transportation, a podcast series of the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization, also known as the MPO. We talk about the ins and outs of transportation in Broward County and all of Southeast Florida, why it matters, how it works, and the challenges and opportunities related to achieving great transportation. I'm your host, Greg Stewart, Executive Director of the MPO. In this first episode, we demystify what the MPO is and does as a regional transportation agency. We also recount a bit of the origin story of the MPO in its current form. Even as the organization is specializing in transportation, we've had our own setbacks and aha moments, figuring out how to most effectively get people where they need to go. To help tell this story, we have...
My name is Dick Blattner, and I had the good fortune of serving on the Hollywood City Commission for 19 years, and for 18 of those 19 years, I also served on the Broward MPO.
Also joining us is...
I'm Sheila Rose. I'm the Deputy City Manager in the beautiful city of Coconut Creek. I've been involved with the MPO for years and years, working on highway construction projects, all the way through the new urban model of transportation. My passions relate to connectivity, greenways, making Broward County more accessible.
A little background on the MPO before we turn it over to our guests. MPOs were initially created as a way to include local public input on federally funded road construction projects. MPOs are directly responsible for identifying the region's transportation policies and vision for the use of federal transportation dollars. This involves partnering with each of the municipalities, transportation agencies, county departments, and other stakeholders in preparing planning and transportation studies. These studies include continuous opportunities to gather input from the 2 million people that call Broward County home. So that's the textbook definition of the MPO. Our guests will give a little more insight into what that really means.
Well, I think the biggest thing we have to address is, what does an MPO do? Why does it exist? And why is it important?
Well, why is it important?
Well, in our warm-up this morning, we were talking about how do you explain to people what an MPO does? And to me, the explanation's always been kind of easy. The federal government has tons of money to distribute, and they don't just stand in front of a fan and let it go, because that would eliminate a lot of people not being able to reach out for the money. So they've decided there needs to be organizations throughout the country that they can allocate money to and give them the responsibility for determining how best to spend it. And without that, communities might be left out because they didn't apply. Some communities would get more money than they deserve. There would be no formula, and it would be much too political.
That's a really great explanation of that. And the first time I ever saw a money booth was on the Don Ho show. I don't know if anybody remembers that broadcast from Hawaii with his ukulele, and they would go into the money booth and try to capture some of the cash. Yeah. Sheila, speaking of capturing cash, you've been working with the city of Coconut Creek now for a while. And prior to that, you were in the private sector on engineering. What has the MPO meant to you and the various jobs you've worked on? And has it improved over the years? What are the process changes that can be done to make things better?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I have seen such a big change in the MPO. When I first started in private practice, the MPO was actually housed in the county building and functioned very much like a county agency, responsible for distributing federal transportation dollars. And the big change is that it is now an organization that serves all the cities in Broward County, that its mission appears to be to distribute the funds that are sometimes difficult to spend because they're attached to federal dollars, distribute them appropriately for good projects, to collaborate between the cities and the county, to have a mission to move the money forward.
So when you're talking mission to moving the money forward, and I think that's actually a really important area to look at, one of the things I know this particular MPO did was adopt a Vision Zero statement. Vision Zero refers to the goal of eliminating all traffic fatalities and severe injuries. So I guess the question is how has that changed the way you all, being the city of Coconut Creek and other cities and engineering firms, look at the MPO and look at how they're doing your transportation planning?
Well, I think, what we've seen in Broward County is that the original development in Broward County was so car centric that it was not sustainable. And to continue to widen roads and to expand highways just doesn't work for the long range plan. The idea of the city of Fort Lauderdale and downtown being the only place to work is no longer the case. So now the cities are all developing their own urban centers with the idea that people can live and work in close proximity to their homes. So I think that's what we're seeing changing in Broward County. And I think the transportation planning has had to respond to that. And maybe it's circular, that it works both ways.
It's an interesting thing. Mr. Blattner, Dick, when you were working in the city of Hollywood as a commissioner, you had a lot of downtown growth there, and it wasn't exactly, the suburban growth that we had traditionally here in Broward. You want to describe what that meant to you when you were in Hollywood and what you were trying to achieve with your urbanized area, your downtown urbanizing and putting in housing and different types of mixed use, and then maybe what the MPO's role in helping that facilitate that to occur?
Well, I want to just, if I can, back up to something Sheila said when she was describing what the MPO was like when it was a part of Broward County. One of the differences between then and now was that whatever money the federal government gave to the Broward MPO by formula was all they ever got. And they never sought other opportunities to gain more. There was no vision there, really, of if we only had a little more money, we could also do these projects. And that never happened. Now it's really just the opposite. In addition to whatever they're going to give us, we have a list that's much longer that's not fundable at this point in time, but it doesn't mean they're not viable.
Really interesting point, because the whole idea is there's a certain amount of money that each metropolitan area gets through prioritization processes. But there's also other discretionary money. And this really hits the big number with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. $500 billion is all discretionary. So setting the cities and the county up to get some of that cash is going to be super important over the next 5 years. But moving that ball forward through the MPO process, that's actually one of the things that the federal government is saying needs to be done. But that actually started with you all, and especially you, Dick, being the chair of the MPO, and how you actually took the organization and started prioritizing getting that extra money. Do you want to talk about what influenced you for that and where your thoughts came from that? And then we'll get back to downtown Hollywood.
Okay. Well, I'll include that downtown Hollywood in the answer in part. I think what you're driving at is what changed here at the MPO for me was realizing that the MPO was reaching out to the 31 cities in Broward County and saying, we've got this money and what do you want to do? What do you want to do with it? And most cities had no idea. They had no planning department. They didn't know how to do this kind of thing. Maybe Coconut Creek was different because you were there, Sheila, but you're unique in that respect. And maybe Fort Lauderdale was too, but Hollywood had no one doing grant planning and so forth that was worth anything, I must say. When I saw that money was being distributed to applicants for that, and the number and my city wasn't getting anything. And of course, parochially, I wanted my city to get at least its share. We discussed the idea that maybe a mission for the MPO would be to teach cities how to apply for grants. Cities that didn't have a grant writer or any expertise, that we would say to them, look, if the MPO sends you a grant application and you don't know how to fill it out, let us show you how to fill it out. And what that meant was everybody got a little bit bigger bite of the apple. Some cities got a bite of the apple for the first time. And other cities who got it by default because no one else was applying got less. But in the overall, we continued to get more money because our vision was we need more money to accomplish all the things that the city said they need. As it relates to Hollywood, I would have to say, now on the outside looking in, that Hollywood's own economic development was so slow that using the opportunity to get grants funded through the MPO enabled me and the city to say, all right, you can do what you're trying to do to develop downtown, but let's look at Federal Highway and 441 and Hollywood Boulevard that are main corridors that are so poorly designed and managed and operating, and see if we can figure out how to use those corridors in a manner that makes it easier for developers to look at it and say, I want to be there because I can see what they're doing with the money to improve access to transportation.
I'll turn over to you, Sheila. I want to talk a little bit about your Complete Streets program and that connectivity that Dick is talking about from the other other roadways into that. Complete Streets are streets inclusive, designed and operated for safety, comfort, and access of all users for multiple types of transportation.
I think one of the most interesting things about Coconut Creek is it's this long linear city with probably the biggest piece of vacant property in all of Broward County. So what an opportunity to set a vision for something different. Most of northwestern Broward County was developed using kind of the standard PUD model where people lived in gated subdivisions. But we had such an opportunity with a jewel right in the middle of the town.
It was a big piece of agricultural land.
Big piece of agricultural land. It, in fact, is still there. But the opportunity to move that vision forward of Coconut Creek actually having an employment center and a place to work, which would allow people to use, their feet, their bicycles to get to work potentially in our new downtown, as opposed to getting in their car and driving to downtown Fort Lauderdale or downtown Miami, was an opportunity that just came with timing. But in order to facilitate it, the Lions Road Mobility Project, which got beautiful buffered bike lanes, fills in the missing gaps of the sidewalks, resurfaces the whole road. So it really has a clean, well-manicured appearance, but it also is safe.
So would you think that the Complete Streets type projects, especially looking at the Lions Road project, do you think that actually not only enhances the economic vitality of the city, but also provides you a different amenity that attracts those who may want to relocate to Coconut Creek?
Absolutely. Coconut Creek's Complete Street Master Plan. We have a series of greenways that track back and forth across the city that connect to Lions Road. You really can get around the city, using something other than your car. And we're finding that, the next generation, the millennials are, they're riding their skateboards, they're riding their scooters. They don't necessarily want to spend, their day commuting. So we think it's a great opportunity. It's a great amenity.
So when you're and that whole attraction of the millennial generation and Gen Z, that aren't necessarily looking to, get into a vehicle and spend the next hour and a half trying to commute to a downtown location. Do you think that that's going to continue that type of trend with Coconut Creek? And how do you, I know that you have that large piece of property that, you can develop, but how do you handle that type of growth that you're going to see in that segment?
Well, I think what we're finding is that it's a mix. It's young families, it's empty nesters, and it's the Gen Z that are all moving to that type direction. Whether people are telecommuting, they're working from home, they still want to go and have a nightlife. They want a good restaurant. They want a place to do a little shopping. Groceries always seem to be the key, but they need to be close. So that, those type of amenities serve all of the demographics that we see moving into Coconut Creek.
So I'm going to throw this to both of you. Now that we've gone through the COVID crisis and hopefully we're hopefully getting to the end of it, a lot of things have changed, even here at the MPO. We have a lot of the workforce working remotely, and we're able to actually do hotel offices. And so folks aren't in the office as often. But how does that change the way you're looking at your cities and the way that the living will be? Because, I think you hit it on the head. It's just like, yeah, they're still looking for grocery stores and entertainment, but does it have to be in a real dense location, or can it be more comfortable and more walkable? And in a way, I hate to say it, re-envisioning the suburban model.
And I think you've hit it. I think the new suburban model is that mix. I don't think we're ever going to go back to what it was pre-pandemic. I think there'll be a hybrid model that'll develop. People will work from home a couple of days a week or elsewhere in the country, but having their home base someplace they find comfortable, that they enjoy the environment. You know, the environment is so important to everybody. They want a green park. They want lush landscaping, and they want to be able to enjoy the great outdoors. And why not? We're in Florida. We should enjoy the great outdoors.
That's a really good point. Dick, how do you see that happening with Hollywood?
It's really interesting.
How's the pandemic hit?
It's really interesting. The two of us represent two different models totally.
Correct.
Sheila just said her suburban model. We are not suburban.
Correct.
The eastern cities are very urban, and they're built out. And so, speaking for cities from Pompano to Hallandale, for example, nobody has large tracts of land on which developments are going to be taking place. Redevelopment will take place, but it's not going to be single-family homes on a quarter or a third of an acre or whatever it is. So the models are very different. And in my city, we're seeing density as a requirement from people moving here. They're used to density. It doesn't bother them to live on the 14th floor of an apartment building.
Right.
It doesn't bother them to work in that building as a part of their living arrangement, to have an office there. So what I see for my city and others in the traditional Eastern Broward County is the challenge of providing a way for them to move around to get where they need to go. For example, biggest opportunity, we were talking about this, you live in Pompano, is how do I get from my city to Fort Lauderdale or Boca? How do I get there? And the answer is right now, it's not easy to do.
No.
But the cities have some responsibility in conjunction with the county and funding through the MPO to get people from that 26-story apartment building they've chosen to live in, which is under construction today, to that train station or whatever that mode is going to be, so that they can get to where they need to be, other than living in a bubble of the city.
And what makes Southeast Florida the most wonderful place, next to probably San Diego, is the whole diversity of our urban environment. You can go from a nice suburban area to a nice urban area to actually a fairly rural area if you go out to Davie and Southwest Ranches. So building these connectivity. And how do you get, because connectivity is going to be different in Coconut Creek than it's going to be in Hollywood. Then what do you do with the urban areas where there isn't the ability to actually have the right of way to use for, future transit opportunities? Dick, when you look at Hollywood or Pompano or Fort Lauderdale, there really isn't the land for a transit system. So how would people react, and what would your reaction be if all of a sudden, like Hollywood Boulevard, we decide, this is a great place for a transit system. Let's put a tram down. Let's put a system there. You lose a lane. What does that mean to the urbanized area when you start losing traffic?
I think to be sort of cute about it, that tram has left the station. Because I think that those who are thinking about this at city level,
right,
and even communities that are feeling choked, realize that there needs to be some other way of getting around than the car. A couple of years ago, Greg, you remember when I think it was the MPO and the Department of Transportation asked 4 or 5 different cities to come down and present how they're using public transportation to get around. The city that most impressed me, surprisingly, was Cleveland. Now, my family originally was from Cleveland, and I remember growing up and understanding what Cleveland was about on Euclid Avenue. But they made Euclid Avenue, which always had a streetcar, into something modern and efficient that took people from one end of town to the other, to the medical centers and to the central core of the city. And the redevelopment that took place, the repurposing of buildings that used to be big department stores into condominiums and apartments, just revitalized the city.
People wanted to live on that line.
They did then. They didn't before. Thank you. That's really part of what I'm saying. Now, in our case, it could be that tram system won't cause major redevelopment. It will simply mean it's easier for people to get from where they are to the medical center that's right now hard to get to because I stopped driving and I don't want to take an Uber every time I need it. But I think that in a way we've seen the nascent beginning of this with the circuits and the shuttle systems that cities are using, and people are using more and more of that. And that's sort of like, those are like the training wheels for a tram system.
And you know that Coconut Creek has what we call the Butterfly Express, and it runs up and down Lyons Road with the idea that it is breeding users for a more robust transit system. It doesn't follow the county routes. It's wholly funded by the city.
It's awesome.
It's adorable. It's branded, but it heads up and down Lyons Road. You know, so during the pandemic, our ridership really tanked because the students weren't using it because they weren't going to school. But it is the fastest, easiest way to get up and down through Coconut Creek.
So, you know, we have to be looking at these things holistically and how those things connect together. So I'm going to ask both of you another question that's, you know, hot topic du jour at this point in time. Right now, they've renamed the Coastal Link project to the Broward Commuter Rail project. And that is putting commuter rail on the FEC. The FEC is the Florida East Coast Railway. Brightline on that particular corridor has the circuit system, and within 5 miles of any station, they can come pick you up, take you to the train, drop you back off. What type of service do you see for the commuter side of that? And how would it best connect to Coconut Creek or to Hollywood?
Well, first I would say how exciting to actually see progress being made towards that East Coast link, the Broward commuter rail, whatever it's going to be called. It's a long, long, long time coming and should be the number one priority for all the cities in the eastern half of the county. To actually get that accomplished is monumental, and it begins to create an environment where transit will work in our county. The shuttle systems, I think, are very valuable, but we're seeing so many innovations with Uber, with last mile transit, that I think those kind of problems will resolve themselves with technology before we start creating defined shuttle systems.
And that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Dick, is that the same thing for Hollywood?
I think that once that plan to have passenger rail on the FEC, really we begin to see new rails laid down and stations being built, I think that the natural thing that will happen is, whether it's private sector or public-private partnerships, develop to say, how do we get people there? And I want to go back a couple of years ago, give County Commissioner Bean Furr a lot of credit. He instituted a program with Uber that instead of people taking the TOPS system to get from their home to a medical office or whatever, they gave you a pass to use on Uber that was less expensive than running the TOPS program. Well, with all due respect, Uber wasn't quite up to it, neither was the county, but it worked. People used it. And it could be that ultimately we will have that kind of a system to get people to the station, where you'll simply place a call and make a reservation, which you can now do with Uber or Lyft anyway.
Right.
I can make a reservation to have them pick me up at 8 o'clock in the morning so that I can go somewhere. That might be one way of doing it. The second way, of course, is community shuttles. Some cities have them and some don't. County has funded some and others not. But for cities that don't have one, they really need to put one together, whether it's the use of trolleys like you did, or circuits, the electric shuttles that Hollywood and Fort Lauderdale and other cities use. I think that's going to happen whether anybody plans for it or not.
Or even the micro transit that we're seeing in East Pompano.
Yeah.
That's a free hop on, hop off service.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it'll happen because it's granular. It's going to happen whether the county realizes that there's a need for it or not. It's going to happen.
So that leads me to this question. What is the future for the MPO and dealing with all the different aspects that we just talked about, whether it's heavy rail, light rail, the circuit programs, these micro transit things? How do we look at that together and figure out the system of the future, and how do we prepare everybody for that?
Well, great question, because I think that's a multi-pronged response, because we've got to have an organization that is responsible for bringing all the cities together and having that comprehensive look at the transportation system. So from a planning perspective, I see there being a real value to continuing to expand the MPO into being the agency that has the long range vision, that is that negotiated vision that covers all modes of transportation. But I also find that there's varying degrees of expertise in all the cities as it relates to the legal agreements, the construction agreements, and the actual process of building transportation projects. We have a great partnership with the Department of Transportation, but the cities there's a level of bureaucracy when you're dealing with federal funds that is not something you pick up overnight. And I think that's an area where the MPO could really assist local governments to make sure they understand that process, help them through that process, and make sure that they're doing the work efficiently.
I think Sheila is right. But the challenges are that there are a lot of players in this game who may not all share the same vision, and maybe more importantly, all want to be the player in the game. And so far, I think the MPO has been successful in bringing the 31 cities into the tent, where the cities understand how to use the MPO, and the MPO knows how to reach out to the cities to get things accomplished. I think that the relationship between the MPO and the Department of Transportation works pretty well. They get funding too. And so these funding opportunities, and certainly the county does. So who's the big fish? Who's got the most money? Who's got the most clout? And I believe that's the MPO.
Well, ultimately with the federal funds, I could see that.
Because the feds have, I think, a lot of confidence in this MPO. I can only speak for this one as one that they know they can reach out to, because there's creativity here, initiative, forward thinking, and frankly, under your leadership, established a reputation nationwide for being innovative. And so I think that the role of the MPO ultimately would be to get everybody under the tent and understand that we can't all drive this bus or this train. Somebody has to say, we'll work by consensus, but I'm taking the lead, or agree to that. So it's a question of utilization of resources, both human and financial. But the answer to the question from my perspective is expand the tent and establish who the ringmaster is.
Well, and that's going to be an interesting thing. And I think that's part of maturing community. You go to a Cleveland, or you go to a Pittsburgh, or you go to Washington, D.C., everyone knows their defined roles. And here in Broward, Miami-Dade, they actually know their defined roles. If you look at their TPA or TPO down there, what they do with the county and what the county does for their transit agencies and all the rest of it. And so, when you kind of look at where we are, we're in our infancy. We really actually are. I mean, we are a mature community. We're built out, but we're kind of still at our infancy. And where we go from now into the future is going to be an exciting opportunity, and where do we take the MPO, but where do we take all of us?
But don't you think that part of the challenge is to communicate that it's smarter to spend the funds by leveraging other funds? And I think that's the message, that it's not parochial. It's smart use of the funds by making sure we use the various buckets of money in the most efficient way possible, and then we use those funds to leverage other dollars. I think that's the message that makes the MPO the appropriate leader.
But I want to go back to the beginning.
Yeah,
the MPO in the modern era, the 90s, let's say. And Sheila was talking about it early in this conversation. It was a minor organization in Broward County. There were more people on the board than could fit on the dais in the county building. We, by lottery, had to choose who got to sit up there as opposed to in the audience. But the significant difference there are many significant differences between then and now. Then the members who sat up there on the board were only interested in whether their city got any money or not. Now that's long gone. And I'm pleased to say that that happened over a period of 10 years or so.
This roundtable, this is always a great way of learning stuff. And while we get to talk to each other, which is always wonderful, but the whole idea also today is we're going to be sharing this out. And so people that might have some interest in this, will be able to hear this and listen to the message. And the interesting thing is, and I'm just, as Dick knows, and I think Sheila, you told this before too, what influenced me in coming to this particular job is there was this book I found back in 1972 that was the countywide plan.
Yes.
And it was,
26.
Yeah. And you look at it and you go, oh, well, there was a transit plan and there was a greenways plan and there was a affordable housing
public art plan.
Yeah, there was, and then there were two different models. There was a suburban model and there was an urbanized model. And we're actually transitioning right now from that suburban model to a more urbanized model. And, when you look at what people have put in, and as long as we can leave those breadcrumbs behind, you never know how they're going to influence somebody. So one day, 30 years from now, somebody might be listening to this. I hope you're having a great time. And to be honest, you can say, oh, well, this was a good idea. Maybe this didn't exactly happen the way it should have, but now here's my opportunity. So I look for this as saying, here's the breadcrumbs for the future. And, they're on their way to their future, and hopefully we can help them get there together.
The Let's Talk Transportation podcast is produced by the Broward MPO, where every day we fund and implement projects that move people and goods, create jobs, and strengthen communities. Learn more at browardmpo.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Speak Up Broward. If there is a transportation topic you'd like to know more about, let us know by sending an email to info@browardmpo.org. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by MPO employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of the MPO or any of its officials. For complaints, questions, or concerns about civil rights or non-discrimination, or for special requests under the Americans with Disabilities Act, please contact Carl Ema, Title VI Coordinator at 954-876-0052 or EMAC at browardmpo.org. Please contact Carl Emma,